to the panel, to all candidates, because they're all going to get an opportunity to respond. Whether you want to hear them or not, they're all going to respond to your questions. Okay? And please, please, please avoid individual attacks. We're Canadians.
1-0 Canucks.
We should go over here, shouldn't we? Ladies first, don't you think? You're a gentleman, I can tell. Ma'am, please go first. Say your name and
My
a
name
question.
is Heather Allen.
Heather?
My question is about Bill C-393, which is the legislation which was actually passed, but is now in the Senate, to send cheap generic drugs to developing countries.
Okay.
It was voted in by the three opposition parties, but the Conservatives voted against it, and I'd like to know where everybody stands on it, because it does not violate any trading agreements. In fact, the waiver was actually suggested by the WTO, and it seems unlikely that pharmaceuticals wouldn't have research in Canada because 50% of their research is actually subsidized.
So your question again.
My question is, how do all the parties stand on Bill C-393, which is the Canada Medicine Regime?
Correct. Okay. So we're going to start with the Green Party. Brandon, you get to answer first, if you would choose. Microphone is there. Please speak directly in the microphone.
This was a missed opportunity. This was a very, very important bill that should have gone through without any question. Most of the parties were on board, even many of the Conservatives were on board for this. The people suffering in Africa require these drugs. We could have easily given it to them. And I've been accused very often of being from an isolationist platform. This is precisely the kind of work that we should be doing abroad. And it's exactly that versus going into other areas of the world with our military. This is the way that we could have shown leadership in the world, and we missed an opportunity.
Thank you.
I support Bill C-393 as well. Something was said at the all candidates meeting in Gibson's that I found shocking, and it wasn't responded to by anyone, including myself, and I'd like to respond to it tonight. One of the candidates responded to a question saying that he didn't know whether we would be able to continue funding hip replacements for 93-year-old grandmothers. And I just want to, and that sort of stuck in my head, I says, well, wait a minute. I have a friend who's had a hip replacement lately. She's about 87. And I'm really glad that she was able to have her hip replacement. And I think that if she needs a hip replacement at 98 or at 101 or at 110, I think that we should support that. I think we're not finished learning from the elderly. And we need to keep providing them with the care as long as they want it, as long as they need it. And this lady, by the way, there was also a bit of bad-mouthing of the Canadian medical system at one of the meetings. And I didn't challenge that either, and I'd like to challenge it tonight. This lady was a friend of mine. She had this hip replacement surgery. She fell while on the bus. And then, while she was in the hospital, she fell again and she got concussion. And so there was blood in her cranial cavity. And she was operated again, immediately. And she recovered very quickly. It's amazing how fast people recover, even elderly people. And so I think that these are things that, by eliminating the barriers to post-secondary education, by eliminating tuition fees, we'll have more and more young people being able to go into medicine, and these operations will be more and more possible and more economical as we have lots of doctors. There's no reason why we shouldn't be trying to have our elderly live till they're 100. They've got a lot to teach us, and 100 and beyond.
Thank you, Roger. Number 4, Doug Hart, please, Canadian Action Party.
There was a lot of Canadian grandmothers that worked a lot of years to try and help children in Africa with AIDS. They had empathy. They worried about people other than themselves. So, I noticed on second reading that Mr. Weston abstained on 393. I would think that, anybody that had empathy and young children like John does Should be no question about, sharing, looking after innocent young children, preventing suffering, and it is terrible suffering that's taking place now, because the Senate that's set up by, and it's not elected by the way, set up by the Conservatives, they had a chance to pass it lots. They had plenty of chances to pass it, but they let it die. So we're talking about big money here. We're talking about big pharma. They don't share. They want to make money on people's misery. Canadians, we want to share and help out people in need, especially children who are suffering badly right now as we speak, that could have been helped by this bill. Thank you very much.
Liberal Party candidate.
Thank you. In direct answer to your question, we supported it, and on second reading, first reading, and we would support it if it were reintroduced. In fact, we would call for its reintroduction into the House into new session. Mr. Ignatieff said last week that he would support it, make it a priority. I would support it personally. On a broader issue, the approach that the Harper government have taken to this issue reflects a small-mindedness and a parochialism, a small Canada, if you will. Ours is a big Canada. It's an embracive Canada. It's a welcoming Canada. It's a nurturing Canada. They vacated Africa completely. We would restore our commitment to Africa in a very significant way. Thank you.
Democratic Party, Terry Potts.
AIDS, HIV. In Africa, it's wiped out generations, and now it's wiping out new generations. It's wiping out economies and governments. It's an awful, awful thing. We support this bill. How could we not support this bill? In Africa, as the rest of the gang have said, you've got grandmothers raising their grandchildren. They're raising them not because, gee, isn't this fun, but because nobody else is there. Their daughters have died. Their sons have died. And now they're watching their own grandchildren die. They're watching their future die. Of course we support this bill. I think a hard person, even a hard person, would support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather, for the question. I wouldn't be surprised if you're with Grandmothers to Grandmothers, which is a great organization. When the bill first came to my attention, I immediately thought I would end up supporting it. I'm past chair of Canadian Food for the Hungry International. I've been in Rwanda, I've been in the Congo, and I've seen the kinds of people that Terry just described in person. And yes, we Canadians care, and we've demonstrated that around the world. In fact, contrary to what was said earlier, this government has doubled aid to Africa and doubled foreign aid generally. The bill involves breaking a patent that would be held by patent holders and allowing a generic manufacturer to produce the drugs for a country that made a special request. So when I looked at that, I found, first of all, that the cost that the drug would end up costing more than if produced in India or China, and so ultimately it wouldn't actually help the people for whom it was intended to help. Furthermore, I checked with Food for the Hungry and other NGOs. They concluded it was just a dispute between pharmaceutical companies, not actually something that would help the people. Then Keith Martin, who is one of the most knowledgeable Liberal MPs and who, like me, has been involved in foreign aid programs, he announced he was going to vote against the bill because it was going to breach the patent without noticeable consequence to the people it was intended to help. So a very tough decision. I spent a lot of time with Grandmothers to Grandmothers and Frost Helen Deering talking about it, and ultimately I do support programs that help the needy around the world. I think Canadians want us to do that, but I couldn't support this bill and I did vote against it.
Thank you, John. Next question then comes from microphone B, and again I would ask you to be as specific as you can. I see you got the big piece of paper in front of you. Make sure that you get to the question. 1 sentence.